the real ones. The real one is finally here. Dancing has been alongside since 10 dancing lessons. Supposed to be. Say again? I might run out and grab a water bottle. Sounds completely good.
I guess we can leave it. She's gonna take that out anyway. Yes. Just so it's visible but out of the way.
Okay.
Alright, cool. Good luck. Break a leg.
there's still some people coming in. Yeah, whenever you guys are ready.
Okay. Still have some folks coming in. So how about at like 5? I would say like 5:12. How long is your presentation?
Around 45, between 45, 50.
Okay. Yeah. So it's only like yeah. Okay. Well, I think they probably do something with the lights when they're breaking. But I'll tell them 5:12. Okay. 5:09 right now.
Works for me.
All right. Good luck, guys.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm giving my kids a few extra minutes to get there.
I know, that's why I said like,
My husband's there. That's good. Yeah, well, you might go poke it.
Go.
While you're there, could you hit the reset button on the timer on the
Yes.
PowerPoint? That way I will keep myself honest about time. Well, it's like I've been practicing it, and it's like it went from like 42 minutes to 51 to 29. I'm like back and forth, but whatever comes out, comes out. It's all good. Which is awesome. Saw my sister in Illinois. Well, it'll be recorded, so. Yeah, I definitely was quite honored to. It's like my students are awesome. I have the best students ever. They're so much fun. I'm so sorry. Oh, it's great. Yeah, you can't escape Mechie without having to refer. It's 5:11, so they're doing the blinky lights things. So sweet.
And then I'll just be here for the lecture. I'll just be around.
Isaacman.
Isaac.
Okay. Okay.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm going to bring this down a little. I'm a little short. My name is Megan, and I'm a member of the 2022 Senior Year Experience Board, as well as a graduating bioengineering student. Before we begin, I thought I'd give a little background on what the last lecture is and the origin of the tradition. The last lecture was given by Randy Posh at the Carnegie Mellon University. Posh delivered his last lecture, which was titled Really Achieving Your Childhood Dreams, on September 18th, 2007. The inspiration for this talk was an ongoing series of lectures where top academics were asked to think deeply about what matters to them and then give a hypothetical final talk to share what wisdom you would impart to the world if you knew it was your last chance. A month before giving the lecture, Posh was informed his pancreatic cancer was terminal. His memorable talk gave the tradition, the last lecture, broader recognition. Just last year, the Senior Self-Experience Board brought this tradition to Northeastern for the very first time. Today, I am thrilled to keep the tradition going with our very own Professor Smizer. While I have not been a student of Professor Smizer myself, I've heard nothing but wonderful things from my peers in the College of Engineering, and it was an absolute pleasure meeting her before this talk. Professor Bridget Smizer earned her Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from MIT, followed by a PhD in Material Science and Engineering from Worcester Polytechnic Institute, before joining the faculty of Northeastern's College of Engineering in the fall of 1999. While at Northeastern, Professor Smizer has made a tremendous impact on the mechanical and industrial engineering curriculum, as well as a profound impact on countless students' careers. Professor Smizer received Best Paper Awards in 2013 and 2017 at the American Society for Engineering Education Annual Conference in both the Division of Experimental and Lab-Oriented Studies, as well as the Design and Engineering Education Division. She was the recipient of the National Association of Corrosion Engineers H.H. Ulig Award, the Martin Sigmund Outstanding Teaching Award here at Northeastern University in 2008, and nominated for Northeastern University's Excellence in Teaching Award in 2013. And now, I would like to welcome Professor Smizer to the stage. Please give her a round of applause.
Thank you, Megan. So you're all here, you made it, you survived years of not sleeping or getting up at those crack of dawn hours for the early morning classes that nobody likes, but you all did it. You got through it all. And you have in your hand, or virtually in your hand, this piece of paper that can be a ticket to just about anything. And I was there once. I was sitting there with that diploma in my hand going, okay, I'm pretty sure I know what to do with this. Well, it turned out that various and sundry things did not happen exactly the way I thought they would, but it all turned out okay. Now, anyone who has had me as an instructor knows that I'm a real experimental type of person. I'm very hands-on, and I've always been like that. When I was 4 years old, I managed to take the color off the toilet seat with acetone. In my defense, they should have hit it better. I was 4, come on. So I was always trying to get my hands into things. And that's why my lecture is entitled, if it works, yeah. There we go. It is entitled Life, an Experimental Approach. So I've always taken an experimental approach to science and engineering, but also there's been a lot of times in life where an experimental approach has really helped. So I'm going to share some thoughts with you about the way I've approached this open-ended experiment that is our life. There we go. Now, the first thought I wanted to share was the idea that your origin is not your destination. This is the house I grew up in, 10909 Mackinac Avenue in Chicago, Illinois. If you know Chicago at all, take Lakeshore Drive south until it hits South Shore Drive, and take South Shore Drive south until it falls off the earth, and then turn right, and that's where my folks lived. So way down, it was right in the middle of a whole bunch of steel mills. And the neighborhood actually acted a lot like a mill town. People were able to get a high school diploma, go work in the mills, raise a family. I had some people I knew who really never went downtown. It was like this little microcosm there. And it was a pretty decent place to grow up until about the mid-'80s. When the mid-'80s happened, a whole bunch of steel mills closed down, and some of them closed rather suddenly. So all of a sudden, lots of people are out of work, families moving out, crime got a little worse, and it generally started to be a little bit more difficult to live in. But this gave me some desire to, see what I could do to advance myself. But more than that, I had these ladies. Now, first we have Mariana Marcheski. She was my great-grandmother. She came over in 1911 when my grandmother was 7 months old from Poland. And as far as education, she had none. She was illiterate. She never learned to even read or write her name. Now, my grandmother, Stephanie Frederick, she got a little bit further. She got to go to school, but then come 8th grade, she had to quit. And that's because she was the oldest of what was eventually 13 siblings, and her parents needed her to go to work to help support them. So that's as far as she got in terms of education. Now, my mom was fortunate enough to go all the way to high school. That's my mom, Diane Banks. And back then, high school diploma was great. She got a job as a secretary at Standard Oil. She worked there, met my dad at some point. Once I came along, she was a stay-at-home mom. And this is all pretty okay. And then there's me. Now, I feel a little bit of pressure to continue this trajectory. But the problem was that there wasn't a lot of context for me. I didn't know a lot about college, and I really wasn't surrounded by a lot of people who knew a lot about college. This thing is being, there we go. Ah. Now, these are the demographics from my neighborhood, the East Side. And these are today's demographics. I couldn't find historical demographics. Now, if you look up here, master's degree or higher, only about 3% of the people in the neighborhood have that. And honestly, it probably wasn't even that high when I was living there. I didn't know anybody who had a master's degree or higher. In theory, I have a cousin who's a professor somewhere in Canada, but I never really met him. He's a lot older than me. And so you didn't see a lot of people with advanced degrees. You didn't see a lot of people with bachelor's degrees because it was so easy to just get a job without one. And the few folks who did go to college tended to go to state schools and such. So there really wasn't anyone who could tell me what it's like to go to something of MIT's caliber, or really talk to me much about college at all. But I did manage to, all right, I'm going to give up on this pretty soon. So I did manage to get into college, and I went off to Massachusetts, and everyone was really proud of me. To this day, I can go to my neighborhood back home, and I'll run into people who I don't even know their name, but they're like, oh, you're Tommy's daughter, the one who went to MIT. That's become my name in the neighborhood. I'm Tommy's daughter, the one who went to MIT. But although all these folks were supporting me, I was still a little bit nervous here. And the reason was, I didn't know exactly what I was getting into. I never visited MIT before I came out here for freshman orientation. And that's because we didn't have the money for college visits. So I came out here, and all of a sudden I'm in this brand new place, and I've got to figure it out. I'd never been east of Ohio, but then here I am. Now, I found Massachusetts to be a bit of a culture shock. And the reason, there's a couple reasons. One of them was when I first came into Logan Airport and wondered where the land was out here, because it looks like when you're coming in that you're landing on the water. So there was that. But these demographics were what was really surprising to me. Every other person you meet has a bachelor's degree. A lot of people have multiple degrees. Most of the people I went to college with had multiple degrees. And so I was used to being a big fish in kind of a small pond. And now I was this tiny little minnow in this ocean. And the assumption was that, of course, you knew what college was like, and of course you knew how it worked, because your parents had gone and all that. Well, that assumption didn't really work for me. So that was, like I said, a little bit of culture shock that I had to get over. Now, I did eventually get over it, and I had my whole plan mapped out. But the plan that I had when I came out here And the road that eventually led me here was not even remotely a straight road. It was incredibly twisty. And nothing happened exactly the way I thought it would. So, in my neighborhood, like I said, you could get a high school diploma. You can do one of two things. You could go out, get a job in retail, get a job as a mechanic. You know, there were things that people did, and a few of us went to college. I chose that route, and so I did eventually, like I said, get myself into MIT. Now, here was my plan. I was going to go to MIT, and I was going to get a degree in chemistry. I liked chemistry in high school. I did really well on my AP Chem exam, so I'm going to go study chemistry, and then I'm going to go out and I'm going to become an industrial chemist, and that's going to be what I'm going to do. Well, I found out that while I was at MIT, that the chemistry there was not really what I wanted to do. And by the second or third year, I was pretty miserable. And there were a couple reasons for that. One of it was, as I said, I'm a pretty experimental person. So all the experimenting was in organic chemistry. Now, if anyone's taken organic chemistry, you know that sometimes it is a subject best avoided. So I didn't really want to do organic chemistry for a living. I liked inorganic chemistry, but everything that was inorganic chemistry was really theoretical, and didn't really grab me. That was one reason. But the other reason was that not a single professor in my department knew me by name. Even my academic advisor usually had to look at the list to see who I was. And so I never got the feeling that anyone cared if I learned or not. I never felt like I belonged to any sort of community. It was just, I was just another body in another seat. And I didn't really like that very much. Now, I didn't want to leave, but I also was getting kind of, like I said, miserable in chemistry. But then, even though I wasn't happy, I decided, you know, there's this material science thing out there. And a lot of the interesting chemistry falls under material science. Plus, they have all the electron microscopes, which I really wanted to get my hands on. So I said, all right, I can't change majors because I can't afford another semester here. So I am going to take as many material science courses as I can, and then I'm going to go to grad school in materials. So I got my degree in chemistry, and I was able to put up with it because I found something else that could keep me going, keep me motivated. So I have my bachelor's in chemistry, and now I want to go to grad school because I want to study materials. There were a few things I had to think about, though. At MIT, I met my husband, Rob, and so that was a very happy occasion, but it made me want to stay in this region because, you know, I wanted to be near him. So, therefore, I applied to WPI. It was a bit of a commute, but it was nearby. And so my thought was, all right, I'm going to go to WPI. I am going to study material science, get my master's, and then go out and work in industry. So that was the plan. I started working on my research project, though, and it rapidly turned into, that. It was kind of a mess, and it was very big, and it kept growing and growing and growing. So I said, all right, maybe I should just, I don't know, take the PhD qualifier exams and see if I can get into the PhD program, because this is a big enough project to be a PhD thesis. Well, as I studied for that, I was incredibly stressed out. I found it very hard to focus, to get all that studying to happen. It was a lot of work. It was months of studying. The fact that my husband showed up to marry me after seeing me study like that proves that this man loves me, because I would have run away if I was in his shoes. But I did pass the quals, and I got my PhD. I skipped the master's entirely. Now, while I was doing my PhD, I did a bunch of consulting work. And one of those consulting jobs hired me right out of grad school. And so, okay, I'm gonna go work at industry. I got a job as a senior research engineer, and now we can start saving for a house and things like that. So, I seem to have made my way. Well, turns out that industry job had some very annoying coworkers. You know, the kind that really make you not want to come to work every day. It also started tanking very shortly after I arrived. And so we were being asked to do more and more research with fewer and fewer resources. So I wasn't very happy there. There was, however, one bright spot. One of my coworkers was approached by someone from Northeastern and asked, do you want to teach an evening graduate course in powder metallurgy? And they said no, they weren't interested, and passed my name along. So in 1999, I got hired as an adjunct. Now, at the time, there was still much of a commuter school, so there were these evening graduate classes, and so for 2 nights a week, I could do something that I liked doing. So I wasn't thrilled, but I had some bright spots. Now, I could have continued in that vein for a while, probably, except I got laid off. I, in fact, got laid off the day I was supposed to come back from maternity leave after adopting my oldest son. Now, I could have been upset about this, I probably should have been, but I really wanted to stay home with my new kid, and the combination of unemployment plus my adjuncting job meant that I could do that. I could stay at home much of the time, didn't have to put our kids in daycare, and I was able to keep teaching different classes, things evolved, and so life was good. In 2010, I got hired as full-time teaching professor, and so life was very good. And so now I get the chance to interact with these really awesome students, and I get to do something that I really like. But if you had asked me back in high school, or if you had told me, you know, you're gonna be a professor someday, I would have laughed you out of the room, because there's no way people like me don't become professors. Apparently, people like me do. Now, one of the reasons that I became a professor, in addition to all that, was I had people who believed in me, even when I didn't believe in me. I still have a terrible case of imposter syndrome. I'm always doubting myself. But throughout my life, there have been people who, even when I didn't think I was good enough, they did. And they either nudged or dragged or kicked me in the right direction so that I could advance, so I could get new opportunities, so I could learn new things. And I really want to showcase some of those folks. They've started out in grade school with Mrs. Katzberger. Now, Mrs. Katzberger was my science teacher in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. It was a K through 8 school. And when I got my doctorate, I sent this woman a letter and said, thank you so much for starting me on this path. And she wrote back her congratulations and also said, I tell all of my coworkers that one of my best students was this kid who would never sit still, fidgeted all the time, wouldn't keep her feet on the floor. So yeah, she remembered me quite well. She didn't mix me up with anybody else. Now, every year, we had to do a science project. And one year, she said, you should submit this to the citywide fair. Now, didn't think this was anything all that great. I mean, it was chemistry of rocks and minerals or something like that. And in the city, there's kids coming from all over, from private schools and everything. And I'm like, do you really think it's good enough? She's like, of course it is, go. So the result was I actually got an honorable mention. And I was shocked. I didn't think I was gonna get anything from that. So that was the start of, okay, maybe I can do this science thing. Now, in high school, I met Mr. Jack Thole. He was my high school chemistry teacher for regular and AP Chem, and he was a bit of a mentor to me. And in junior year, started thinking about college and things, and so I asked him, what are some good schools for chemistry? And he said, you should apply to MIT. And no joke, my response was, what's that? I had never heard of MIT. This was before the internet. This was me living in a place where people really only went to state schools that I knew who had gone to college. So I didn't even know what it was. I hadn't heard of it. So he tells me, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and I said, okay. When it came time to apply, I asked him, how hard is this place to get into? Because I really didn't understand that it was, on par with Ivy League. I didn't know what I was getting into. And he's like, don't worry about it. I'll write you a recommendation, apply there, and get a new calculator. The reason for the calculator thing was because I had a calculator that I had used so much that I had worn the numbers off, and I kept using it just to be stubborn. And he said, if you go to MIT with that, they'll throw you out. So I got into MIT, and I got a new calculator. Now, when I got to grad school, I started TAing a lot for this woman, Chris Demetri. I was her TA for I don't know how many terms in the end. But she really introduced me to the idea of engineering education, which is the bulk of my research. And she encouraged me to try new methods when I taught the recitations. She gave me advice, she coached me. And at some point, they developed this seminar in college teaching. She's like, you should take that. And I'm like, okay. And she's like, no, I've seen you teach. This will really up your game. You've got to go take that. And so, okay, I took it. And I learned two things. First of all, I learned how to teach. I learned that there are certain mindsets among different students. There's different ways of learning. And I also learned that education research is a thing. It honestly didn't occur to me. I know there's a lot of research in K through 12, but the idea that people were studying how to teach college students, and in particular engineering college students, better, that was kind of a revelation. I thought, okay, professors get to college and then they just wing it, right? I didn't realize that people actually studied how this worked. And so that was the start of, like I said, a lot of research for me. Now, grad school wasn't all wine and roses, though. As I said, I was pretty stressed out studying for the quals, but I developed terrible test anxiety. I was really having trouble keeping focus, studying effectively, and it was really just stressing me out. And I was in an exam with this professor, McCloof. Yep, that's his name. And Professor McCloof was a really nice guy. And in his exam, I just lost it. I started crying. And I just kept crying through the whole exam. When it came time to turn it in, I was one of the last people to turn it in. I went and got my stuff, and I was leaving the room, and he followed me out. And he brought me over to the soda machine and bought me a soda and said, what's going on? Because I don't want my class to be a form of torture. What made you so upset? And I just sort of, let it out that I didn't feel like I belonged in a PhD program, and I'm stressed out, and I don't feel like I know anything, and I just blew this test, and I've been blowing all of my tests, and I just don't belong here. And he took the time to say, a bad test doesn't make you a failure. And then he said, I'm going to give you a copy of the exam. You take this exam copy home, and you show me that you know the material, because I know you know the material. And he's like, I'm not going to give you, a perfect 100. I'm going to take whatever you do the second time and average it with what you did the first time. But I know you know the material. Show me. So from this, I learned that it's actually possible for professors to be both compassionate and rigorous. I had met a lot of the rigorous, but to have a professor actually care about me as a person, to notice that I was really distressed and to reach out to me, that was amazing. And it meant so much at the time. Now, he could have said, oh, there's another emotional female student, or, you know, if they're breaking down over this exam, they don't belong here in grad school. But that's not what he did. He made sure that I knew that somebody cared. And again, that's a revelation. And I'll never forget that. Now, this guy is my thesis advisor, Rick Sisson. He was the department chair at the time. And one summer, I was the TA for a class on electron microscopy. Now, I did a ton of electron microscopy for my graduate work, but I hadn't actually taught this class or anything. Well, the professor's wife had been battling cancer for a long time, and she died a couple weeks into the term. So one morning, I get called into Rick's office, and he says, you're going to take over the electron microscopy course, and you are going to manage the microscopy facility. And I was like, I have never taught that course, and don't we have George who takes care of the microscopy facility? And he's like, George is retiring. He's getting too old to climb under and around microscopes anymore. Ron's wife died. He's out for the rest of the summer. You can do this, and you'll do fine. I didn't believe him, but I actually ended up learning how to manage a lab. I got to know every single microscope repair guy on the eastern seaboard and all the vendors. And I also learned how to teach a hands-on class. And the thing about the hands-on class was I had to teach other people something I was really good at. And that's actually really hard, because when you're really good at something, you still have to put yourself in the mindset of someone who's seeing it for the very first time. And that was a challenge, but I rose to the challenge. Now, the last person who got me where I am, all the mechanical engineering students know this guy. This is Professor Magalchi. And he was the department chair in 2010. Now, in 2010, there was an opening for a lab director / teaching professor. And I liked the lab director idea a lot. But I looked at the description of the job, what they needed to do, and one of the things they needed to do was be able to teach measurements analysis, big lab class that I teach every single term. Well, I looked at the description of that and I said, I can't teach this. I don't recognize half the terms in the description. I'm not a mechanical engineer. And so at one point, Professor Magalchi called me at home and said, why haven't you applied for this job? And I said, well, because I don't think I'm qualified to teach measurements. And he said, put in your application online and come in on Monday. Now, I came in on Monday expecting a job interview. So I was all, prepared for that. What I got was, you're hired. Class starts in 8 days. And when I kind of picked my jaw up off the floor and started to protest, he said, you'll get all the material from the previous instructor, the TAs will help you, the technician knows what he's doing, you'll be fine. Well, that was the hardest term of my entire teaching career. I was working very hard to stay about 38 seconds ahead of my students, but it turned into a full-time job, and it turned into something I enjoy doing research on now. So now I research lab pedagogy and design pedagogy and so on. So that leads me to my next point. If you are out there in the world and you find things that really need to be fixed, work hard to fix them. Things that really need to be fixed are not easy to fix. And I found that out, again, with measurements and analysis. As I said, I inherited this 8 days before class started. I did not have time to change anything. So I had to go with the lab equipment, the lab experiments, the handouts, everything that was already there. But here's the problem. This was 2010, and it said, bring a floppy disk to class. So these had not been updated in ages, and no one had taken the time to do it. A lot of the equipment was either kind of old, or there was one piece of equipment, and they expected the whole lab group to stand around this one piece of equipment, and usually only one or two people got to actually touch anything. It was all very canned. There was kind of only one solution. Well, I started as the lab director asking students what they liked in labs, and I got ideas like make it something that you have to build or something exploratory. And I got a lot of comments about it's really annoying when I go to lab and I'm there for 5 minutes watching the TA do a demo, and then they give me the data that's written on the board. They could have just emailed it to me and saved me the walk to campus. So I felt like I needed to change that, and I had to start with my own course. Now, over the summer of 2011, I started really working on this problem. I first did some background research. There's a lot of information out there about best practices in laboratory education, and I could look up what works, what doesn't, what other people have tried. I also started surveying my students. I still do this every single term, and I survey them about each individual experiment. And I ask, does this help you learn? Is it interesting? Is it frustrating? Is it something that you can imagine using elsewhere? Things like that. The other thing I did to really figure out how to fix this course was, after that first extremely long term, I offered my students extra credit, can't remember how much right now, but if they would take those lab handouts, print them out, and mark them up, and let me know what was unclear, what was missing, what needed to be said. And so I got a stack of marked up lab handouts for every single experiment. And I compiled them all onto one master document for each experiment. So this is just one page of one of the lab handouts, but all this green ink was the compilation of all the students' feedback on that one page. So I had a lot of material to work with now, and that was really useful. So during that summer of 2011, I worked my butt off to get this completely renovated. I made all new lab handouts. I made sure they were clear. I ran them by people. I came up with new experiments. Some of the current ones I kept, but I modified to make them more open-ended. Some, we came up with new ones. So this one, students had to ride a bicycle-powered generator to generate electricity and measure the RPM and all this other stuff. So that was very, very hands-on, got everybody involved. And I started writing about it for my research. I started publishing what I had done and how it worked and how I kept track of how it was doing. Now, over the years, I've been keeping track of all this data. And this helps me to see when I do something that works or when I do something that doesn't really work. And sometimes I get mixed results. So this here is the old labs. That was the ones I inherited. And you can see that, this is, was it interesting and engaging? Not so much. Didn't really help people learn that much. But then here's where I put in the new labs. And right away I could see I was on the right track. Make these things open-ended and hands-on, and people really respond to it. Now, over the years, I tried some different things. In 2015, I put out these new data acquisition systems. Before, if people wanted to, say, program in this programming language called LabVIEW, they had to come into the lab. They could only do it there. They couldn't really do anything at home. So I replaced that with these little portable ones, and people really liked it. They found it, like I said, very engaging, helps them learn. They also found it kind of frustrating because now they couldn't use the programs that were on the lab computers. They had to actually write them. So that was a little frustrating for some folks. Now things were improving, but again, people were asking, can we get more LabVIEW instruction? Because you don't really give us that much. So I tried to add more, and it didn't go so well the first term. Part of that was I wasn't very good at LabVIEW yet. Part of it was my technician knew one way to teach it, but that didn't work for everybody, and he really didn't like teaching. So I gave him some coaching, I figured out LabVIEW more, and things were on an upswing, and this was great. And then COVID. Now, I had a new problem. I was really married to this idea of hands-on, open-ended labs. I think they're really important. But now I got to do it with half of my students in another country or another state. That was a bit of a challenge. So once again, I started from scratch. Instead of using those other data acquisition systems, we started using Arduino. Now, for those of you who may not be engineers, Arduinos are small circuit kits that can be used to build robots or build sensors and such. And engineers have to buy these for their freshman year engineering course. So I decided to build on what they already had and what they had learned a little bit before. I sent everyone a kit with extra sensors and wires, and the people who were on campus used that kit on campus, and the people who were off campus did experimenting at their houses. And I made sure that everyone who was on campus was paired with someone who was off campus. And therefore, they needed each other's data in order to do the lab reports. And again, I wrote about it, and I tracked it. Now, as I said, before COVID, things were doing pretty well. The COVID shutdown hit. We only got to do about 4 of the 6 labs. I know some of the folks from this year got slammed with that. And then I started these hybrid labs. Now, they were frustrating, and definitely people didn't find them as engaging as I thought they would be. And part of the reason was my instructions weren't clear. And I always find that what I think is clear and what my students think is clear doesn't really match a lot. So I tweaked things and tweaked them some more, and things got less frustrating and things got more engaging, and I've managed to continue that trajectory. But I'm still going to keep checking. I'm still going to make sure every term that the information I get is used to improve things. And that's sort of using that experimental touch to make an experimental class better. Now, I've also used the experimental design idea to make things better for my own life in places. Like I said, life is experimental and open-ended, and you should consider yourself a subject of research. Now, the engineering design process, and it's probably the same wherever you have to make a design choice or solve a problem, you have to identify the problem. You have to understand what that problem has to be able to, the solution has to do to be able to be solved. You have to come up with solutions, evaluate them, build a prototype maybe, test a few of them, and then communicate the solution. Well, I'm doing the communicating the solution thing right now, but here was my problem. Remember how I said I was this really fidgety kid and I had trouble focusing in grad school and I got stressed out? When I was in my 40s, I was seeing a therapist for some other reason, and she asked me, have you ever been tested for ADHD? And I said, no. What? I don't have ADHD. I mean, there's no way I could have it. Well, I took her screening test, and I hit every single marker, every single one. And so this explains a lot of my difficulties earlier in life. Now, it was becoming a problem because I had more and more students. So I had more and more reports to grade in particular. And grading reports was taking me a lot of time, and I would get distracted, and so it would take even longer. So I was constantly scrambling to catch up. So I wanted to figure out a way to make it easier to grade without getting distracted. So the next thing you have to do is understand your problem. So I said, okay, whatever I find as a solution, it's got to work both at work and at home, because I grade in both places. And my metric that I'm going to use is number of pages graded per hour. So I want to maximize the number of pages I get graded per hour. And I did a little research. What do other people do? What does ADHD mean in terms of strategies to manage it? And Is it different in men and women and all this other stuff? So once I had some information, then I started brainstorming solutions. My therapist recommended mindfulness meditation or medication. I'm very sensitive to sounds and noises, so I thought maybe either playing with having the right background sound or having no sound might work. I could completely clear my work surfaces of all visual distractions. I could work at the library in one of the study rooms, which is kind of an empty room. I could use a dartboard to determine grades, which would definitely speed things up. Now, once I evaluated these, though, I can't really completely clear all my work surfaces because I need notes, I need textbooks and all that, so that wasn't going to work. Working only at the library has the problem that if I really don't want to read what's in front of me, there's a whole library full of more interesting books. So that didn't work. I like to have a job, so I couldn't use dartboards. So these last four things were sort of partial solution. Medication worked a bit. Mindfulness meditation was good for stress relief, but I can't really grade with my eyes closed. So that didn't really solve it. So I decided to go after sound and try different types of sound and see which one gave me the most pages graded per hour. So I did actually do this experiment. And on different days, I tried for a certain amount of time at different soundscapes and decided how many pages I graded. I tried absolute silence, and I found that I got very distracted and started surfing the web, so that didn't work. I tried white noise. That worked for a few minutes, but then I either found it annoying or I ignored it to the point where it was just as bad as silence. I tried music. Now the problem is I really like music, so I was either singing along or I was trying to think of what should I listen to next or browsing around for songs, so that didn't quite work. And I thought maybe I could put something on Netflix and have that in the background. Well, I tried the TV show Supernatural. I really like this show, but it's a really good show, so that was kind of distracting. I also tried Ken Burns documentaries. Now, I like history, and Ken Burns documentaries, he just uses stills and interviews for the most part, so you don't have to really look at it. And I still sometimes have some success with those. But the result, the thing that actually worked the best, really surprised me, and that was bad found footage horror. And I am dead serious, and I still, if you come by my office, you may occasionally hear screams. That's me listening to bad found footage horror while I grade. And the reason that this works so well for me is because they are all exactly the same. There is somebody with a camera who goes to some creepy haunted place, and then they get picked off one by one, and someone finds a tape. That's pretty much all of them. You just put them in different locations. So it's enough sort of to keep that wandering part of my brain occupied, but not enough that I feel like I have to sit there and be glued to every frame, because really, they're all kind of the same. So doing those little experiments on yourself can really be a way to figure out, how do I make things better for myself? How do I work with the brain that I have and the circumstances that I have? So I have one last point to make, and that is to give the next person a hand up. This is something that's always been very, very important to me. A quote that from about my favorite book, this is one of my desert island books, Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. And it says, a person who pulls himself up from a low environment via the bootstrap route has two choices. Having risen above his environment, he can forget it. Or he can rise above it and never forget it and keep compassion and understanding in his heart for those he has left behind him in the cruel upclimb. When I came out here to Massachusetts, I could have told anybody anything about where I came from, but I never was, not proud of where I came from. I wanted to remember that, and I wanted to make sure that I turned around and did something for the folks that were still coming up the chain. Now, one of those folks is my little sister, Brenda. Now, little is a strong term because she is several inches taller than me, but she's 6 years younger. And when I was in college, she was in high school. Now, the high school that we went to was a college prep high school, Catholic school, and my parents really struggled to put us through that. They remortgaged the house, almost got the utilities shut off a couple times, but it was that important that we get that preparation so that we could progress in our education. And so there were times when I was in college where I really could have probably used a little bit more money from mom and dad, but I never asked, even when I probably should have, because for me, I didn't care if I had to eat ramen for every single meal, and I felt like I did sometimes. But when I was eating that ramen, I was giving my little sister a gift. I was making sure that they didn't have to worry about me so that they could take care of her and her education. And that was incredibly important to me because I wanted her to have the same opportunities. Another thing I would suggest is find something that gives you joy and just give your time to it as generously as possible. These are my Cub Scouts. My kids aren't in Scouts anymore, they're in college, but I still volunteer with Cub Scouts, and I am the Cub Master of Pack 8 in Needham. Another thing that I didn't think I could do until someone shoved me into it. Now, there are weekends where I got so much to grade, I just don't have time for this. But I make time for these guys. They're my little walking antidepressants. They're so funny. They love to learn new things and demonstrate that they know them. And I never regret any single minute I spend with them. So if you find something like that, give it your time. It's totally worth it. Another thing you should do is really keep learning along the way. That whole lifelong learning thing, it's actually a good idea. I joke that the way I became a professor was I took notes on everything that my professors did that I didn't like, and I do the opposite. Which isn't exactly 100% true, but I did look at, okay, what's a good way to learn? Active learning, what makes people effective or ineffective? One of the things that was really important to me was learning about Maslow's hierarchy. If you don't know what that is, that's this idea that if people don't have things satisfied at low levels, on the level of food, water, sleep, security, safety, you're not going to be able to learn the really high level stuff that you have to learn. So for me, that means if a student is falling asleep in class, I'm not going to yell at them. I'm going to talk to them. Maybe they're falling asleep in class because they had to work an extra shift so they could pay rent. Or if a student doesn't come to class for a couple days, I'll reach out to them, and especially if they were always coming, maybe they're sick. I could give them an extension. It's no skin off my teeth. If someone's struggling with the material, I don't care if they learn it on Tuesday or Wednesday. I just want them to learn it. And so by noticing when students are having issues with those needs, they're depressed, they're nervous, they've got a job interview, whatever it is, I may not be able to fix their problem, but I can listen. And that really does help. Now, the last thought I'll leave you with here is the idea of celebrating other people's victories. Because honestly, sometimes it's much more fun than even celebrating your own. Now, over the years, I have advised a bunch of capstone design teams. This was the first one I advised. That was a few years back. And they got an award for biggest impact. And I was really proud of them. And that was my first time around, but really all I did was sort of aim them and step out of the way. Well, this year, and these guys, some of them are probably around in the audience, these guys won an award for biggest impact. And the whole time that they were doing the poster session, they were like, we are never going to win. We're going up against this other group, and they're really good. We're never going to win. And they were really surprised. I knew they were going to win, because it did have a big impact. Now, these guys and their teammates, they didn't win a capstone award, but they were working for a company, and that company is going to patent their idea and build it. And that's just amazing to me. So all of these students, really all I did was sort of sign purchase orders and stay out of their way, and they did amazing things, and it was so fun to celebrate that with them. But I also want to talk about my kids. Now, I celebrated when they graduated from high school just like any parent would, but for me it was extra, extra special. Neither of my kids had a really straight, easy path through high school. A lot of kids in our town, you know, they just sort of breeze through it and there you go. But between health issues and ADHD issues and other issues that were going on in their lives, they really struggled sometimes. And I'm sure there were times they wanted to throw in the towel and just say, forget it, I'm not doing this anymore. But they didn't. They managed to get through. They managed to get through on time and graduate in the same amount of time as everyone else. And I was so stoked for them, because now they've got that piece of paper that is the ticket to further learning. And there is nothing that I find more just totally rewarding than watching them succeed. So I really hope that you all find that person who believes in you and listen to them, and find things that you can contribute to, because it's so going to be worth your while. Once again, congratulations, everyone, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Professor Smizer, for this incredible talk and for giving the class of 2022 their final lecture here at Northeastern. To show you our gratitude, we have a certificate we wanted to present you from the class, and thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much. This is great. I'm going to need a bigger wall. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think class is dismissed.
Yeah, I think so too.
Thank you, everyone.
We also have